a special edition. Every year I try to do something like this for the game in college football. And yes, I'm talking about Michigan and Ohio State. Both will play this Saturday, and the game is in Ann Arbor. Um, I'm excited for that. And I was looking at all the rivalry games out there. And I always say, other than March Madness, college football, the bowl seasons, this is probably my favorite weekend of sports. You got the Apple Cup between Washington and Washington State tomorrow night on Thanksgiving. You got the Egg Bowl. This year's Egg Bowl with Ole Miss and Mississippi State will be a lot different. Unfortunately, the passing of Mike Leach, that game just won't be the same without Mike Leach on the sideline with Lane Kiffin. Iowa, Nebraska. You got the Civil War this weekend, Oregon and Oregon State. Oregon playing for, I still think if Oregon wins out, Oregon's in the playoff here in a couple weeks. We'll know a little bit more. But I was looking at all the lines for the big games, and all the lines are huge. They're, the Iron Bowl, Auburn and Alabama, double-digit line. Michigan, Ohio State's probably the game with it's Michigan's -3 at home, which home field advantage. You always say it's a field goal, but I think these games this weekend are going to be lousy. I don't see any really game outside of Michigan, Ohio State. I know you throw the records away. So if the game's a two-touchdown game, maybe you throw the lines out. Rivalry games, maybe it's a little bit closer. I just don't see it with a lot of these games this week. But I'm really, really, really worried about this Michigan Ohio State game. I said it from day one when the season started. I said, win or lose, I said this would be Jim Harbaugh's last game for Michigan, and I still mean that. And not only because of the sign stealing scandal that's going on in college football, I just think that with the NIL, with the NCAA, with the transfer portal, all these rules now in college football, why deal with it if you're a head coach? Why do you want to deal with all the pressure um, and deal with the NCAA? Go to the NFL where they basically draft your team, they pick your team, and you go coach the team. You don't have to worry about recruiting. You don't have to worry about the NIL and who's spending what to get players. So I still think, and now with the whole sign stealing scandal at Michigan, I do think this will be the last year for Jim Harbaugh. And I do think there's a chance next year in 2024, if he decides to stay, I think you will have significant fines next year where he may miss the entire season. But I'll say this, and I said this on the podcast last week, and I'll say it again. Sign stealing gives you an advantage. But if you're going to tell me Michigan runs for 300 more yards rushing in 2 games against Ohio State, that the sign stealing is the reason why Michigan beat up Ohio State the last 2 years, you're crazy. Ohio State fans are going to think that. Ryan Day thinks that, oh, well, Michigan, stole our signs. That's why they outrushed us by 300 yards and smacked us in the mouth both years. I firmly believe that even with the sign stealing, physically over the last 2 years, a team that has run the football in this series has won the game. Physicality, Michigan has been that the last 2 years. Now, I've said from day one, I think Michigan and Georgia are the two best teams in the country. However, the last 2 weeks, and my wife and I were at that Penn State game, which was awesome. We had great seats. Michigan didn't have to throw the football against Penn State, and I think it's a couple things. I think it's not only that is their line the Joe Moore winner for the best offensive line in the country. Yes, of course it is. Michigan struggled on the outside to protect edge rushers against Penn State. The very first 2 series for Michigan, J.J. McCarthy was sacked and running for his life. So what did Michigan do? Let's go run the football 35 straight times in the second half. Let's wear you down. Let's keep your offense off the field, and let's play defense. And that's what Michigan did. Maryland was a trap game. Maryland was a trap game. It was the same thing year before. They won, I think it was 31-24 a year ago, the week leading up to Ohio State. They just had to win and survive. J.J. McCarthy has not looked good the last 2 weeks. I'm a little concerned about that going into the game because I think JJ's going to have to throw the football, maybe some play action pass in that game. But he hasn't looked the same since Jim Harbaugh has been off the sidelines. Now, many will say, well, Jim Harbaugh doesn't call plays. Yes, he doesn't call plays. But for a kid like J.J. McCarthy, before a game, on the sidelines, it's a lot different without your head coach. Sherrone Moore's got to do double duty this week. He's got to be your offensive line coach. He's got to be your offensive coordinator. He's got to be your head coach in the biggest game of the year. So we'll see if he can handle that. And listen, he's handled that extremely well. And I know everybody after the Penn State game, they said, "Oh, Sherrone Moore, it's Michigan against everybody, Michigan against the world." They didn't like that he was crying and this and that because Jim Harbaugh wasn't dead. Don't take what's going out on these kids or some of these coaches, even though many, including myself, will say this. Did Jim Harbaugh know and these coaches know about the sign stealing scandal? Until I see proof and still the NCAA shows me evidence, right now Jim Harbaugh has been suspended with no evidence against him. No evidence. Now, if there's a fall guy, of course, we're going to see that. I said the same thing in college basketball with North Carolina. I said the same thing over the years with Syracuse. The head coach knows what's going on within the program. But nowadays, these programs are so big with boosters and the NIL, it's hard to keep track and know exactly what's going on. But Jim Harbaugh looks like a different man. You see him in press conferences now. He gets to practice with the team, just can't be out there with the team. If you look at his face, he looks entirely stressed out. He looks entirely different than he did. But this is a huge thing. They may suspend him the entire 2024 season if he decides to stay. They may take scholarships away. So we'll see. There's going to be a lot to find out over the next year or so here in the next couple of weeks as well. So the game, as I just said, number 2 against number 3. And even the top 4 rankings, everybody's talking about Ohio State and Michigan. Michigan's schedule hasn't been very good. I'm going to say this about the schedule. Ohio State's played Penn State and at Notre Dame. Those are the 2 games that Ohio State played. Other than that, the conference has been terrible. Michigan went in to Penn State. Ohio State played them at home, and Ohio State struggled for 3 quarters. Michigan really dominated the game from start to finish. And then Michigan played a UNLV team that's 9-2 that's going to win the Mountain West. They played, East Carolina, and then a MAC school. Ohio State's played the same schedule. So everybody's saying that Michigan's schedule has been bad. I don't think Ohio State's has been really that great either when you look and see who they played. Notre Dame should have beat Ohio State. Notre Dame beat Ohio State. Notre Dame screwed that one late in the game. And listen, don't get me wrong. Kyle McCord went down and led a great drive in the fourth quarter to win that game against Notre Dame. So that's a great win going to Notre Dame. And Notre Dame, I think, is 9-2 so far this year. But number 2, number 3, I would have had Georgia at number 1. I would have had Michigan at 2. I would have had Ohio State 3, Washington 4, and then I would have had Florida State 5 in my rankings. And listen, I think if there's any team right now out there that's getting passed over, I think it's Florida State. I know you got the injury to Jordan Travis, the quarterback. You'll look a lot different, but you could potentially have 4 or 5 unbeatens at the end of this weekend going into next week. Bama right now, to me, nobody wants to play him. I think this is the best coaching job that Nick Saban has done in his career at Alabama. Jalen Milroe looks like a completely different person. And then at the beginning of the year, everybody wanted to run Tommy Rees out of the building, and Tommy Rees has done a fantastic job calling plays for Alabama. So let's dive right into this here. So I just want to let me just pull a couple of my things over here. So what's at stake this week? You got the Big Ten East titles on the line this week. That Big Ten West is garbage. If you're Iowa, you're at 9-2 with literally no offense. Whoever wins, whether it's Michigan or Ohio State, Iowa's going to be a 2-touchdown, maybe a 3-touchdown dog in the Big Ten championship game. And next year, when they go to one conference, I don't know what happens to Iowa, Minnesota, Northwestern, Wisconsin, because in comes USC, in comes UCLA. I just don't think that Big Ten on that side, those teams are going to struggle. I don't know how they're going to compete with these Big Ten East teams. Got a chance to play in a Big Ten title game. As I said, the winner gets Iowa, that's 9-2. Iowa's got Nebraska this week. I think it's at Nebraska. Matt Rule's team's fighting to get bowl eligible. They're 5-6. Should be a field goal game. I don't know. Iowa's games are 2 and 3 point games every week, but they continue to find ways to win. They got a chance to win 10 games with no offense. And I know many may not like Kirk Ferentz. I've always liked Kirk Ferentz. I think it's been hard that he's had his son as the offensive coordinator, and it just hasn't worked out. But if people remember, Cade McNamara, the Michigan transfer, was supposed to be the quarterback, got hurt. So that's a big, big deal. And their backup quarterback got hurt too. So I think Iowa's on like their third string quarterback this year. A ticket to the college football playoff. Many are going to say this: if Michigan loses, they're in a New Year's Six game, which will still be good for Michigan. But with one loss, the committee's going to say, haven't played anybody. Michigan's out of the playoff contention. But I have a feeling, like last year, Ohio State loses the game last year. What do? They backdoor themselves into the playoff. And listen, Ohio State should have won the national championship last year. They missed a field goal against Georgia. A one-loss Ohio State team would be really interesting to see where the committee would put Ohio State, how far they drop them, especially if Georgia loses the SEC title game. Both these teams are 11-0. If you're a college football fan, you're a college football junkie like I am. And I said this to my wife the other day because my wife's an Ohio State fan, and she was rooting for Michigan to lose. Of course, she roots for Michigan to lose every game. You want to see these two teams 11-0. Like, this is it. This is what you want to see every year if you are a Michigan or an Ohio State fan. You want to see both these teams undefeated. You want to see both these teams with a right to play for not only the Big Ten championship, but the college football playoff. How about next year? If this is the last game next year and they play each other, how about if they're both 1-2 in the conference, then they got to play each other again for the Big Ten title? How crazy would that be for these two teams? And then last but not least, bragging rights in the family. My dad's a Buckeye fan. My wife's a diehard Buckeye fan. The only positive about this game on Saturday is I'll probably catch the first half, and then my son's got his football banquet at 2 o'clock. So I'm going to have my phone on me watching the score the whole time. But it's bragging rights in the family. My wife hasn't really talked Michigan, Ohio State the last 2 years. Normally, we're down in North Carolina. So last year, I got a chance to watch it out there. And then the year before, I had to drive 14 hours home, listen to it on the radio. So I'll get a chance to watch it again, but we'll see. It'll be for bragging rights in the family again this year. So let's talk about some of the key players for Ohio State first. Obviously, Kyle McCord. You know, the note on Kyle McCord is this: hasn't played that well on the road. He's completing 60% of his passes, but his 4 interceptions have all been on the road. Here's what I'm going to say. And I know some might like Colin Cowherd, some may not. I was listening to him the other day, and he said this: C.J. Stroud couldn't beat Michigan last year. And we know what C.J. Stroud's doing in the NFL. C.J. Stroud is a much better quarterback than Kyle McCord. But Kyle McCord has gotten better because I think the offensive line for the Buckeyes have gotten better from the first 2 weeks. They're running the football better now. They're protecting Kyle McCord. He's got the best, probably the best, not probably, I would say the best receiver in college football in Marvin Harrison. So Ohio State is playing really good football at the right time. Marvin Harrison, in my eyes, I guess you can look at this 2 ways. Does a Heisman Trophy go to the best player in college football? And normally they say it's a quarterback award. If you want to say that the best player in college football, I think it's Jaden Daniels, a quarterback from LSU. I don't care that LSU's got 3 losses. I think he's the best player in the country. I think Maserati Marv is the best wide receiver in the country. I think Marvin Harrison's got to have a big game for Ohio State. They've got to find ways to get him the football. They got to find ways to protect Kyle McCord so he can get Marvin Harrison the ball downfield. And then I think Kate Stover is going to be big for them in the red zone. The last couple years, Ohio State in the red zone, 5 or 6 field goals. They're going to need touchdowns this week against Michigan. I think Kate Stover is going to be huge for them in the red zone. So look for Cade to have a big game as well. And then Travion Henderson, I said, hasn't been running the ball. He was hurt for the first part of the year. The last 2-3 weeks of the season, probably for the last month, you could arguably say Henderson may be one of the best backs in the country because he's finally back healthy. This line is healthy. This offense now is running the ball and throwing the ball. So I think Henderson's going to have a big game as well for the Buckeyes. We'll flip it here. We'll go to Michigan. I don't think there's any surprises here. Blake Corum for the first time in this game is healthy. Knock on wood. It's his birthday. 20 touchdowns. He's been averaging just under 5 yards a carry. I think him and Donovan Edwards are going to be key. Donovan Edwards hasn't had the season I think a lot of people has hoped for. I think they've used him in different ways this year. I think you're going to see Donovan Edwards more in the slot in that spread offense, possibly in a wingback set. I think he's going to be huge. And we'll see. Roman Wilson didn't play last week. Roman Wilson got knocked out. I know it's precautionary reasons, took a big hit. They're going to need him in there. He's a Biletnikoff award. So I think he's a semifinalist. I don't think they announced the finalist yet. Colston Loveland's got to be big too. He's another one in the red zone. Good target for JJ. And how about big game Mike Sainristil? What a season. What a career Mike's had at Michigan. Here's a guy that was a wide receiver converted into a defensive back. I would think you're going to see him if they don't double Marvin Harrison. You might see him underneath, but he's usually that nickel back. And then, of course, J.J. McCarthy. I mean, listen, J.J. hasn't played well the last 2 weeks. Maybe it's the ankle. He hasn't looked that great. He hasn't turned it over that much. They're going to need J.J. McCarthy big time. I'd like to see some play action pass a little bit from J.J. He's going to have to beat you with his feet. He's looked a lot different since Jim Harbaugh had. I know people are going to say, well, since the sign steal and the investigation over the last 2 weeks, JJ hasn't played well because other teams know what he's doing, or Michigan don't know what the other teams are doing. I'm not buying that at all. I'm not buying it at all, but I do think J.J. McCarthy's got to have a big game. Last year, if we remember, Ohio State said, if Michigan's going to beat us, they want J.J. to throw the football. And J.J. threw the ball last year, which opened up that run game. So we'll see what type of game that McCarthy is. I'd like to see some play action pass early. I'd like to see some double tight end sets by Michigan to help them run the ball. This Ohio State defense is a lot better than it was a year ago. Jim Knowles has done a really good job this year with this defense. So we'll see if they're up for the task in stopping Michigan's run game. Let's flip it to some of the keys here for Michigan in this one. They got to dominate the trenches. There's no doubt. I'm old school, and I think you ask any coach in the country what wins games. Ask Deion Sanders. Deion's trying to build Colorado from the outside in, and his son Shedeur Sanders took in a beating back there at quarterback. So Michigan's got to win in the trenches. This is an offensive line that's banged up, and if you watch them the last 2 weeks, they have struggled with edge rushers. And I really believe that that's why against Penn State, they went to running the football because they couldn't block the edge rushers for Penn State. And Ohio State's got some pretty good edge rushers as well. But I think this whole line will figure it out. They're the Joe Moore Award winner, and I have a feeling that they win it again for the third year in a row. Big plays and big moments. The Buckeyes had no problems the last 2 games moving the ball against Michigan. They gained over 400 yards of offense in both of those games. The key difference, Michigan forced 5 field goals inside the red zone. And I think that's what Michigan's going to have to do. They're going to have to bend but not break. And I think they're going to have to hold Ohio State to field goals. And then I think the other thing for Michigan, I think it's got to be creative play calling. With no Harbaugh on the sidelines, I think it's going to be run heavy, but I think it'll open up the passing game. If JJ makes some throws early, I think this could be a long game for Ohio State if he can hit some short passes, maybe Colston Loveland, Roman Wilson downfield, and they can still run the game. They're not just going to be able to get in the shotgun and run an inside zone and bang Blake Corum straight ahead for 2-3 yards or Donovan Edwards for 2-3 yards. They're going to have to be creative, whether it's a one-back, 2 tight end set, whether it's a one-back overload set. They're going to have to be creative on the play calling side. And I think Sherrone Moore will be ready for that. Some keys for Ohio State, they got to be able to run the football. Michigan only gives up 90 yards a game. They're 6th in the country, Michigan, in stopping the run. They're number 1 in the Big Ten. and stopping the run. And Ohio State averages only 145 yards a game on the ground, which is 84th in the country and 8th in the Big Ten. Think about that. Ohio State's run game, 8th in the Big Ten in rushing um, this year. But I think if Henderson was healthy most of the year, I think that would have changed a little bit. That offensive line was atrocious to start the season for Ohio State. I saw Ohio State against Youngstown. My wife were at that game. I think it was 30 something to 7, 32-7 maybe. Ohio State couldn't run the football that well against Youngstown State early in the year, and now they're running the ball well. But let's not overlook the fact that they ran the ball against Minnesota, who's not very good, and stopping the run. And I think they got to be physical and not fancy. The most physical team in this game, I'll say it again, the team that runs the football in this series wins the game. The last 2 years combined, Michigan has outrushed Ohio State for 300 yards. Ohio State's known for wide receiver U, and I think if you go back and you look through it, the offense has always been let's get the ball downfield, let's score a lot of points. They've always had the receivers, they've always had the quarterback. We'll see what Kyle McCord does. Kyle McCord hasn't played in this type of environment this year. I know you can say the game he went to South Bend at night, which is a hostile environment. He did have the fourth quarter drive to win that game. But again, I think Notre Dame should have won the game. I think Notre Dame dominated the football game against Ohio State. But Kyle McCord, hats off to him, looked really good on that series. And he's looked good, the last 2 or 3 games. But again, I don't know, the level of competition hasn't been the greatest. Penn State, I thought, played them pretty well, held them one in check. I think it was, 20-12 or 21-12. I think Maryland played them well for, 3 quarters. Rutgers played Ohio State well for 3 quarters. And you could say the same thing about Michigan, right? These games are close for a half, and then Michigan wears you down. Ohio State wears you down. Late in the game, but I think that's what good running teams do, right? They wear you down. Mike's saying, how's the investigation going into Ohio sign swapping with Rutgers and Purdue? I keep seeing that. I keep seeing a lot of that on Twitter. You don't know what to believe on social media, but I think there might be something brewing there. I think the other thing is this, and I believe this. Some people are going to say no. I was talking to Nick from CBus, who lives out there, who knows a lot about the Buckeyes and what's going on. I know he's not going to agree with me when I say this. If Ryan Day loses again for the 3rd time, I think Ohio State's like 55-4 against everybody but Michigan. And if he loses without Jim Harbaugh on the sidelines in this game, I'm not saying Ohio State fires Ryan Day, because I think anybody would take the numbers that Ryan Day, he's been in the playoffs the last 2 out of 3 years, has him in contention again to go to the playoffs again. But I've heard rumblings, and I don't have any proof of this. I just saw a lot of different Twitter posts over the last 2 or 3 days. Ryan Day's interested in this Texas A&M job. And I know Columbus fans are going to say, no way. There's no way Ryan Day leaves Ohio State to go to Texas A&M. And I'll just say this, why not? Texas A&M just bought Jimbo Fisher out, paid him $75 million to go away. $75 million to go away. Ryan Day probably can go to Texas A&M and make $10 to $12 million a year at A&M. And who's Texas A&M's rival? Texas Tech? Like, who is it at A&M? Does Ryan Day really want the stress of the game every year? And now with the Big Ten, with, again, UCLA coming in, USC coming in, Oregon coming in, do you want to deal with that? I don't know. I'm not saying it happens. That's all. I'm not saying it happens. And I know Nick from CBus the other night said, no way. Then I said, well, maybe Ryan Day goes to the pros. Maybe he goes to the Bears with Justin Fields, But I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I don't know. I'd think about it, right? Money talks. It's like with Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer didn't have to leave Ohio State. Urban Meyer probably said, Ryan Day's the up and coming coach. Things are changing. Let's give it to Ryan Day. I'm going to leave Day with a good team. Let him win. Blah 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 blah. The rest is history. I think Mike Elko probably gets the Texas A&M job. He was the defensive coordinator there. I think it's probably Mike Elko's job. You see the same names being mentioned for all these jobs. Jeff Traylor, the UT San Antonio coach that was a high school coach in the state of Texas, has been rumored for that job. Who's under more pressure in this game? Is it Michigan? Is it Ryan Day? Because if Ohio State wins, people are going to say, well, Harbaugh wasn't on the sidelines. Well, they had this big scandal, the big investigation. I just keep saying this is at some point in time, how Sherrone Moore and this team has kept it together through all this. And again, maybe Michigan's the hated team, but Michigan against everybody. I think everybody wants to see him lose outside of probably the Michigan faithful. That are still rooting for him. I'm going to root for him no matter what, even if things come down where every coach was involved. I'm still going to root for Michigan just because that's how I am. I always root for my teams through the good and the bad. But I think it's on Ohio State. I do. I think it's on Ryan Day. I think if Jim Harbaugh was there, maybe this game's a little bit different. I think it's going to be cold. I think there's going to be a chance of snow. I don't think Kyle McCord's played in an environment where there's going to be 115,000 people, at this game. And I think the great thing is the Fox noon kickoff team is going to be there, and so is ESPN's Game Day. And I keep seeing all these posts that they're going to boycott the ESPN Game Day, and there's going to be nobody there for it. They're all going to big noon kickoff. I think that would be great. Even though I like Herbie and the guys, I like Dez. I like Sunshine Scooter. I like Lee Corso. I love Reese Davis. But we got a chance, my wife and I, we were down in Penn State, we got a chance to see the Fox Noon kickoff, the crew there with Matt Leinart, Brady Quinn, Urban Meyer, Mark Ingram. We got a chance to see Charles Woodson was on set for, and it's really pretty cool, how they set all that up for these games. So I think it's be a great game. I will tell you this: my confidence levels is less now than what it was at the beginning of the year. I would probably say for 10 weeks, I would still stand by and say I think Michigan and Georgia are the two best teams in the country. But the last 2 weeks just kind of makes me wonder, is all this finally catching up to Michigan? But listen, it's a veteran team. The old line's a veteran crew. They got the better quarterback, I think, in my eyes. They got the better run game in my eyes. They got the better defensive line in my eyes. Now, I do think, and people were saying, without Jim Harbaugh there, is it a 6-point advantage, Ohio State, without? I don't think so. I don't think so because I think Sherrone Moore's done it all season. And listen, if Ohio State wins, hats off to Ohio State. Then people are going to say to Ryan Day, well, you should have won. Jim Harbaugh wasn't on the field. And then if he loses, they're going to say, well, you couldn't beat an assistant coach? Come on. But I think it'll be a good game. I think it's going to be the best game of the day. Again, I was looking at some of the lines tomorrow night for the Egg Bowl. Ole Miss is a 10.5-point favorite against Mississippi State. The Iron Bowl, Auburn, Alabama, it's a double digit. The Civil War, Oregon State's a double digit. So I think a lot of those games are going to be ugly games, and some of them will be close games. I mean, Iowa, Nebraska, does anybody really want to see Iowa, Nebraska? I think last week at one point the game was 2-0, the Iowa game. So we'll see, but it'll be a great weekend of football. I'll be locked and ready to go on Saturday for this game with everything on the line. So I'll get to my last thing. You're going to probably say, I'm going to pick Michigan to win this game. So I'm going to get right to the prediction part. I do have Michigan winning this game. I'm going to stand by it. I was going to change this and go like 32-28. Some people are thinking this is going to be like a 17-14, 20-14, 20-17 game. I think both defenses are going to be locked and loaded for this game. I think it's going to come down to maybe a special team play, a fumble, big turnover late in the game, maybe a quarterback's got the ball with a minute to go and they got to drive down and kick a game-winning field goal. But I think both defenses are going to stop the run. Who makes the big play first? Who makes the big play first, whether it's in the passing game? And I'll say this and I'll end with this. Whoever runs the football wins this game on Saturday. And I still will hold to it. I think Michigan's got the better run game than Ohio State. Ohio State hasn't seen a run defense like this. And I'll give Ohio State credit. Defensively, they are a lot better this year than I thought they would be. I give them a lot of credit, and I give their O-line a lot of credit. I think that O-line has been much better throughout the season. I think Kyle McCord has gotten better. But when you got Marvin Harrison out there, it'll be interesting to see how Michigan's going to defend. If you try to play too high safety, that opens up the run game a little bit more. They're going to have to play some man coverage and take chances at some point in this game. You got to hope that they can get the Kyle McCord and let him make some crazy decisions. So I'm going Michigan 28-24, and I said it in the preseason. I had Michigan at 12-0. I had Ohio State. Actually, I had Ohio State, I think, with 3 losses. I had them losing to Michigan, Penn State, and Notre Dame this year. So I had Ohio State at 3 losses. Sunday, the Mohawk Valley Sports Watch. We're going to keep it a podcast this week. Last week was really fun. We're going to have Syracuse alum, Rome Sports Hall of Famer, Scott Petoniak's going to join the show on Sunday. We're going to talk about the firing of Dino Babers. Who are some coaches, potential coaching candidates in Syracuse? We'll recap these big games that are going on. Hopefully I'll have my Michigan jersey on celebrating a Michigan victory. But we'll talk to him. We'll start it at 9 o'clock. If you want to interact with the show, you definitely can do that. You can put some comments and questions in the chat. We'll be happy to bring you on screen. So, again, I'm going Michigan 28-24. I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving from the Rock Pile here and the Mohawk Valley Sports Watch. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show, and go Michigan, go blue on Saturday. Have a good